The East German Air Force was called Luftstreitkräfte der NVA, Air Forces of the National People's Army. In this video I'll provide more background about how it was formed, how it worked and how it ended, and of course about their aircraft. Coming up. Hi and welcome to another East Germany Investigated video. The German Democratic Republic maintained the most capable and well-equipped air force in the Warsaw Pact after the Soviet Union. Because it was the primary frontline state bordering West Germany and NATO forces, Moscow supplied the East German military with preferential near top-of-the-line technology and the most rigorous training in the Eastern Bloc. To tell the history of the Luftstreitkräfte, as the East German Air Force was called, we first have to go back to the aftermath of the Second World War. And before we start, again thanks for your likes, comments and subscriptions. A special thank you to those of you who have donated a super thanks. The Allied powers had decided that Germany had to be fully demilitarized to avoid it starting any future war. But tensions grew between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies, which resulted in the foundation of a West and East German state in 1949, and in 1956 the German Democratic Republic established its own armed forces, the NVA, Nationale Volksarmee. I made a video about the NVA previously in which I talk about the East German Army and what happened during the first decade after the Second World War. The history of the East German Air Force didn't start with the foundation of its armed forces in 1956, but years earlier, in 1948. In that year, the barracked police units were introduced, which in fact consisted of soldiers in all but name. And these secret forces also included an air force. Although some aviation activities seem to have begun very early, the first definite evidence dates to 1952. Tensions between East and West had increased, and in response to Western developments, in July of that year the existence of the barracked police was formalized. The Kasernierte Volkspolizei, the KVP, was established. This was partly a reaction to the rearmament plans of West Germany and of the West as a whole, because in May 1952, so 2 months earlier, the treaty establishing the European Defence Community, the EDC, was signed. This treaty, also known as the Treaty of Paris, was signed by 6 West European nations, including West Germany, allowing West Germany to rearm, but under a European command. In addition, there was a war ongoing in Korea between the North and the South, in which the Soviet Union and the United States were involved as well. With the EDC treaty and this war in mind, it was a logical step for the Soviet Union and the East German leadership to step up the militarization of the German Democratic Republic. Along with steps towards the further development of ground and naval forces, the actions in 1952 also included the foundation of the East German Air Force. This was founded separately from the KVP as part of the People's Police, as the Volkspolizei Luft. 1 year later it was put under the control of the KVP. Heinz Hoffmann was appointed as head of the KVP based on both his military experience and his prior role in organizing the GDR security forces, as well as the confidence placed in him by the SED and Soviet leadership. In 1960, Hoffmann became defense minister and would stay in that role till his sudden demise in 1985. He was then succeeded by Heinz Kessler, who had been the first chief of the Air Force in 1956 under Hoffmann. By the time Kessler took over the role of defense minister, he had already been deputy minister for 3 decades and had held several leadership roles within the NVA. After reunification, Kessler had to stand trial alongside Erich Honecker, accused of responsibility for the deaths at the East German border. He was found guilty of manslaughter and spent 2 years in prison. In the first years of the East German Air Force, training was conducted by Soviet instructors. In 1952, the first group of student pilots went to the Soviet Union after they had been prepared by studying theory for a few months. Of course, this all happened in the greatest secrecy. The operation was named Lehrgang X, Course X. Training took place under extreme weather conditions with the Yakovlev Yak-11 and Yak-18 aircraft. In the years that followed, those 2 types of aircraft remained the most common planes. In May 1955, the Warsaw Pact was established, primarily as a Soviet response to the integration of West Germany into NATO a few days earlier, and the prospect of a rearmed West Germany. At the same time, it institutionalized the Soviet Union's existing military dominance over Eastern Europe and completed the division of Europe into opposing military blocs. These developments reflected the intensification of the Cold War, as both sides increasingly organized their military forces and alliances in preparation for a possible confrontation. As part of these developments, in March 1956, the German Democratic Republic transformed their Kasernierte Volkspolizei into the Nationale Volksarmee, the National People's Army, NVA. The establishment of the NVA represented the institutional completion of East Germany's rearmament process. As part of this new military, the country's aviation capabilities were reorganized into what became known as the Luftstreitkräfte der Nationalen Volksarmee. Soon afterwards, the name was expanded to Luftstreitkräfte Luftverteidigung, meaning air forces, air defense, reflecting a dual responsibility. The number of personnel was around 8,500, which was almost double the figure of 1952. Unlike many Western air forces, to the GDR, air defense became just as important as offensive aviation. This reflected Soviet military thinking, whereby protecting strategic territory against NATO bombers was considered one of the highest priorities. The first operational jet fighters at the Luftstreitkräfte were the MiG-15 and an improved version of the MiG-17. MiG stands for Mikoyan and Gurevich, the men who started designing military aircraft at the end of the 1930s. MiG was and still is a Russian company. The MiGs used by the East Germans were mainly produced in the Soviet Union. As of 1956, the MiG-15s started replacing the Yak-11s and Yak-18s. The MiG-15 had already proven itself during the Korean War a few years earlier, where it was demonstrated that it could challenge modern Western aircraft. In the case of the East German Air Force, to be precise for the military experts watching, they received the MiG-15 bis and the MiG-15 UTI. The 15 bis had a single cockpit and was the combat aircraft that could carry heavier armament. The 15 UTI had a two-seat cockpit and was developed to train pilots. The MiG-17 was introduced in the summer of 1957. Alongside the basic type MiG-17, the MiG-17F and 17PF were also in use. The F had an afterburner and the PF in addition had heavier radar equipment and was the better interceptor, but had less maneuverability. As the Luftstreitkräfte expanded, new air bases were constructed across the GDR. Locations such as Preschen, Lage, Drewitz and Marxwalde gradually developed into important operational hubs, allowing fighter aircraft to reach virtually any part of East German airspace within minutes. At the same time, radar installations spread across the country, feeding information into an increasingly sophisticated air defense network coordinated with Soviet commands stationed inside East Germany. By the end of the 1950s, the Luftstreitkräfte had evolved from a small aviation component of the Barrack People's Police into a modern jet-equipped air force that formed an essential part of the Warsaw Pact's Northern Front. The construction of the Berlin Wall in August 1961 transformed the Cold War. What had once been a political confrontation was now marked by concrete, barbed wire and armed guards. For East Germany's military, including the Luftstreitkräfte, the wall was far more than a symbol. It represented a permanent state of military readiness. For the Luftstreitkräfte, a new phase was about to begin, one in which readiness, rapid reaction and constant surveillance would define everyday life. The German Democratic Republic occupied one of the most strategically important positions in the Warsaw Pact. To the west lay West Germany, a member of NATO, to the north the Baltic Sea, and only a short flight away were NATO air bases in West Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands. If war ever broke out in Central Europe, East German pilots knew they would likely be among the first to take off. In 1962, the true backbone of East Germany's air defense arrived, the legendary MiG-21. As of the mid-1950s, the first supersonic MiG, the MiG-19, went into production. The first jets arrived in East Germany in 1959. The capabilities of the MiG-21 overshadowed those of the MiG-19. Its radical new delta-wing design and the variable intake cone allowed it to reach Mach 2, nearly doubling the speed of the MiG-19. Over the years, the Luftstreitkräfte would operate more than 400 MiG-21s going through various modifications, from the early MiG-21 F-13 to the highly capable MiG-21 bis. Being the most produced supersonic aircraft in aviation history, the MiG-21 was fast, agile and deadly at high altitudes, but also relatively simple to maintain. For over 2 decades, this delta-wing interceptor was the primary shield against Western reconnaissance and potential bomber attacks. For many East German pilots, the MiG-21 represented a significant step forward. Transitioning from earlier aircraft required extensive simulator work, classroom instruction and hundreds of hours of practical exercises under close supervision. Only the most capable pilots progressed to frontline fighter units. Selection standards were rigorous. Candidates had to meet demanding medical and psychological requirements. Physical fitness was essential, but so too was political reliability. Like every officer in the Nationalen Volksarmee, pilots were expected to demonstrate loyalty to the socialist state. Membership in the Socialist Unity Party was not formally mandatory for every pilot, but career advancement often depended upon political trust as much as flying ability. Military education therefore combined aviation training with political instruction, reflecting the close relationship between the armed forces and the ruling Socialist Unity Party. At the end of 1967, the East German Air Force had 24,000 personnel. Although in smaller quantities, just for the sake of completeness, the list of MiG aircraft in the GDR Air Force needs to include the MiG-23 and the MiG-29. In the case of the latter, the GDR was the first export customer to receive 24 of this latest crown jewel of the Soviet Union. The jets came into operation in 1988, only 1 year before the Berlin Wall crumbled. The Sukhoi Su-22 also deserves a mention. Around 50 of these aircraft, which specialized in tactical ground attack, were in use during the last decade of the GDR. In addition, MIL helicopters were widely used. During the period of their existence, the Luftstreitkräfte had around 300 of them, of which approximately 200 were still in use in 1990. Large-scale military exercises were conducted regularly, led by the Soviet forces, which, by the way, also had their units permanently stationed inside the GDR. Exercises such as Shield, Soyuz and later Zapad demonstrated how different Warsaw Pact air forces would cooperate during a major European conflict. Thousands of aircraft, armored vehicles and troops participated across Eastern Europe. Although the exact wartime plans remained highly classified, historians now know that East German fighter units were expected to protect advancing Warsaw Pact ground forces while defending critical infrastructure against NATO air attacks. The expectation was clear. Should war come, events would unfold at extraordinary speed. But luckily, history took a different course. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and within months the communist regime of East Germany dissolved, and its highly disciplined, heavily armed military machine suddenly found itself without an enemy, without a mission, and soon without a country. On the 2nd of October 1990, the day before official German reunification, the Luftstreitkräfte were officially disbanded. What followed is a unique chapter in aviation history. Overnight, the West German Luftwaffe inherited an entire fleet of Soviet hardware. Most of the older MiG-21s, MiG-23s and Su-22s were quickly decommissioned, sold to museums, scrapped or given to foreign countries for technical evaluation. Western engineers spent months dismantling these jets, eager to learn the engineering secrets of their former adversaries. But there was one exception, the MiG-29s. The West German Air Force recognized that these jets were too good to throw away. They westernized the cockpits, converted the instruments to feet and knots, and integrated them into the unified German Luftwaffe. At the time of German reunification, the personnel still numbered almost 21,000. Many pilots and technicians faced abrupt career transitions. Some continued service in the unified German Air Force, while others left military service entirely. Today, historians view the East German Air Force as one of the most tightly integrated and professionally trained components of the Warsaw Pact outside the Soviet Union itself. It operated not as an independent strategic force, but as a highly coordinated element within a larger military system defined by Soviet doctrine. Its structure reflected the logic of the Cold War in Europe: centralized planning, rapid response readiness, and permanent preparation for a conflict that luckily never came. The Luftstreitkräfte der NVA vanished almost overnight, leaving behind a legacy of strict discipline, considerable technical expertise, and a lasting connection to the history of the Cold War and the divided Germany of that period. They were a key component of East Germany's defense system, shaped by the demands of the Cold War and ultimately transformed by the political changes that brought that era to an end. Thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one.